We have noticed a great change in the students' behaviour. They feel a lot more supported. We do check-ins Monday, Wednesday, Friday every morning, first thing as a support faculty. Here they feel that they belong and they're cared for. We can resolve issues a lot quicker and students feel like they've been heard and valued.
We initially reached out to Real Schools because we wanted to address a couple of concerns within our school around consistency. Our teachers could be more consistent. They tried very, very hard, but we're all selling a different message, whereas now we're all selling the same message. And I find that has seen great value in the first 6 months.
Before, like this whole new script that the teachers sort of have been given, I think that students weren't really actually listening to what the teachers were saying. But I think now students are realizing that they really should be paying attention and that the teachers are doing it for their own good.
The teachers have changed a lot. I feel like with Real Schools helping them, they've become more consistent and there's more of a format on how they deal with students and, help them into the class, and the lessons flow a lot smoother.
The videos that Cassie produced for us were short and sharp and concise. They were to the point that allowed staff to understand what's being said, how they can implement things, and then what they could expect as an outcome from using her key points.
They used terminology that we had already implemented already. She read the room and she understood what we were doing, and she was able to then develop that in video form for us that we were able to then pick up and then run with really easily.
We constantly enjoy when she comes to visit. She's very professional. But the fact that she has all that knowledge from being there as a past principal, it really assists us because she knows what we feel like. On the ground running, she knows exactly how we feel. So that really assists with everything.
The interaction with Cassie from day one has been nothing but professional, and the staff really appreciate all the time that she gives to us. Staff have come on board so quickly with this process with Real Schools because they see the value that it adds to our school in achieving success for not only staff but also for our students in the community.
We noticed after COVID that children can't regulate their emotions. For whatever reason is going on in the community, coming back and trying to interact with each other, talk with each other, solving problems, it's just not happening. So Real Schools has been able to give us the language to use and actually made us reflect on how we are in the classroom as teachers.
For the children, the biggest advantage for them is that they feel like they're heard. So they come in, they get to express how they're feeling in the morning. And I can see it impacting other areas of the curriculum too, whether it be a reading lesson and we're talking about how a character might be feeling. They're able to identify those emotions and feelings and use effective statements better as well.
I reached out to Real Schools because I had worked with Adam previously in a different setting and I just loved his approach to school culture. So that's why I got in touch, because even though we already did have quite a good school culture here, I really felt that it could be enhanced with the work with Real Schools.
I was a little skeptical at the beginning. I've done restorative practice before. The way that Cassie has interacted with us and has got us to talk about it as a group. We do our teacher circles. So we're actually talking about our feelings, how we want the day to be. It's really made us reflect on that. And so moving forward, it is going to only be positive for us and for the students that we're teaching.
I was fortunate enough to have Cassie come into my classroom and conduct an emotional circle where they're just coming from lunch. She really understood how they were feeling in order to take that into consideration for the lesson that she was going to teach. All the kids were engaged. They were captivated by her energy and how passionate she was. Even though she was a complete stranger to them, they just knew that she was there to help them.
She's a really amazing person. I like the fact that she's personable and she uses stories. She's like a normal teacher here at school. She's someone who fits in. She's got the experience and she doesn't stand out as just an instructor. She sort of blends in. I think that's one of the best things about having Cassie here at Fern Court.
It didn't matter what question we threw at her or what scenario we gave her. She had an answer instantaneously for us, or a story of something similar that had happened that we could relate to. So yeah, Cassie was great.
In 12 months' time, I would like consistency across the school with staff in how they are managing student behaviours. They already do a fantastic job, but that is the goal, that everyone is consistent with their approach.
Being able to have the kids reflect on their behaviour and not to always want to retaliate as the first point of conflict, to be able to recognise their emotions and self-regulate and be able to remove themselves from the situation and then use those practices on their own out in the real world, not just in the classroom. And if we can teach them that, then I think we've done our job properly.
All right, welcome. Fabulous to have you all here. I'm hoping that I've done this correctly, and in some ways you're able to see the presentation now, and I've been able to demonstrate my incredible skill in being able to transition from sharing a video across to working with you today. I really appreciate your time. It's your most precious commodity, and that you'll invest it in this kind of learning for yourself, but also on behalf of your school is something that I'm really honoured by. For those of you who I've not met before, my name is Adam Voigt. I am the founder and the CEO of Real Schools, and I'm a former principal who's been working and passionate about restorative practices implementation in schools for probably a couple of decades now. I guess not too modest to say that I know a thing or two about what restorative practices is, should be, can be. And it's probably part of the reason why I want to show you those couple of videos at the beginning of the webinar today, rather than kind of at the end, as kind of like, here's the recipe and here's the one I prepared earlier. I sort of like the better idea of showing you what it is that we could get to, because there's hope. Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's really important, but I think educators and school leaders in Australia are looking for at the moment, is some light at the end of the tunnel a little bit, that this is actually really doable, and that the benefits of walking this journey come really early. The real benefits come when you actually embed this work, and in a lot of ways the effort drops out of it. But the benefits that schools like Ferncourt and Mount View are getting early in their journey are significant and really hard to ignore. So thank you very much for investing in the possibility of that being the case for your school. Let's give you the kind of the flight attendant piece, if that's okay. I want to remind you in kicking off today that what we're going to do after the webinar today is send you a bit of a pack. So we're going to send you an email with a whole bunch of different resources. I'm going to reference them across the webinar, but for instance, you don't have to be here today to get that pack. So as is the case whenever we run a webinar like this in school hours, we get about 50% attendance. I was delighted. It was a real, it was a real fillip for me that we've had more than 70 principals and assistant principals decide to join the webinar today. In a system the size of WA, population-wise anyway, that's significant. So that you will do that, but what I don't want is for the people who can't make it because of school life to miss out. So what we'll do is we'll send you all an email with any of the resources that I mentioned today, and make sure that you get hold of those. One of them is the white paper, the front cover of which you can see on as my title screen today, Caught in the Implementation Gap. And I wrote this first up for West Australian schools because your system was the first government school system in Australia to say our schools are going to be restorative in nature, and to release that through the student behaviour in public schools policy and procedures. I want to start by saying is actually a worthy ambition. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But I also noticed the gap that left both the system and you as school leaders in, and wanted to speak into that. So whether you have accessed that already or not, we're going to make sure that is a resource that comes across to you. Second thing I want to point out is that you'll have already seen my eyes darting down and around, that my bias today is not for presentation, not to entertain you. Sorry about that if you came along today for dinner and a show. My bias today is to inform you and to resource you. And so you'll notice that to do that, you'll see me sort of darting around, and if nothing else, perhaps take it as an invitation. You know, I know that, for instance, we've got people in the room. I'm going to just open up the chat box now who are already, for instance, partner schools of ours. G'day, Angela. Good to see you. You're an A, so you're at the top of the list. And there's a few others that are in the room as well, I think, that have already sort of stepped into this restorative journey and this restorative implementation. Great to have you here. Your comments are welcome. So know that you can do little things like, and I'm just doing a quick scan of the list now to see that nobody's got their hand up. You can put your hand up if you want to, make a verbal contribution. You can also make a comment in the chat box, and I'll do what I can to just keep an eye on it and make sure that I'm attentive to that. I'd love this to be as contextual as it possibly can be, and I'm always mindful that in an exchange like this, that I bring the content, but you bring the context. And if I can embed that in the reality of a WA school looking to do this work, then all the better. So just remember that. I think one of the other things that's probably worth declaring is you may have already noticed that I'm slightly skew to camera. And it's because I last Thursday had an arthroscopy on my right knee. It's not allowing me to sit straight where there's a bit of a panel at this desk here. I need to sort of turn a little bit to be able to keep that knee with a little bit of room to move and a little bit of room to straighten from time to time, so that it doesn't get all achy and gross on me. So again, you can take that as a reminder that you can contribute to this in some way. And the final thing I want to do as part of the introduction today is to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today, wherever that land might be for you. For me, I join you today from Bunurong country, on the beautiful Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. I had a principal recently in WA when I mentioned that I live in a place called Dramana, and our office here where I am today, looking out the window to country that's not all that appealing today. If I have to be really honest, Melbourne's turning on Melbourne for me today as I look out the window. But a principal in WA recently said to me, you live on the Margaret River of Victoria. And having visited Margaret River once, I'll take it. It's a fabulous part of the world. And I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians and elders, both past, present and emerging. I don't think you say both past, present and emerging. I'll get my language right around that, all of those things. Because of the immense lessons that I've learned around culture from working with Aboriginal people, particularly in the Northern Territory, over an extensive period of time. And I know for a lot of the people joining today, that's part of your reality too. So thank you for joining me from whichever country it is that you're joining us from today. All right, let's get into it. So what I want to do today is, first of all, just start with dispelling a little bit of a myth sometimes. Sometimes when I say that, for instance, the expression of even being caught in an implementation gap is probably one that you're not unfamiliar with. There are times when we work in a system that we are asked to respond to an imperative of the system and we feel caught in the gap. And there are times when those imperatives, sort of come down the pike at us and we go, yeah, for real, we really have to do this now, do we? I remember one in my time as principal when it came through that we needed to do extensive sandpit scouring and inspections because we needed to make sure that there were no sort of, artificial bodies or, that's how they were referred to. What they really meant was go and check that there's no syringes that have been left in the sandpits. And I remember thinking, okay, I get it, but jeepers, you're not aware of what I'm already having to commit to here. And sometimes we get a bit worn down by that. And sometimes it means that we lose a bit of discretion around whether the things that we're asked to do are actually worthy things to ask us to do. And in this instance, the instance when the WA government said, actually, we're going to have our government schools in WA go restorative, I want to first begin by saying that I congratulate them. I congratulate them because this is a move towards evidence and away from hypothesis. So what I mean by that is that there is a significant body of evidence and research that sits behind the decision to make WA schools restorative that I don't think has been existent in rigour in previous decisions that have been made across a number of different states in Australia. I think that what has sat behind a lot of the programs around behaviour and culture and conduct and practice that schools have been asked to do in Australia has been a hypothesis. And the hypothesis has been, if I may be so cynical, that you'll do it, that schools will implement. And that's all we really need people to do. And I think it's left people in leadership in a really bereft position. It's actually, you know, quite soul destroying in some ways, is to kind of go to a whole heap of effort, and this this concept of schools being asked to go to an enormous amount of effort for just a little return is one that I think we need to challenge. But I think that around the behaviour, conduct, culture and engagement piece, for a long time, schools have been asked to implement programs, and they've done it. They've gone to an enormous amount of resource in terms of time and expenditure to do that, and they haven't had the return that they're looking for. They haven't had, for instance, the stories that Mount View and Fern Court have illustrated to you in the video that I showed you today. They've had things get a little bit better for a lot of return, and I think that that's not okay. Because the hypothesis has been wrong. The hypothesis around use is an inadequate one for the mission that you have. You deserve, for instance, an approach to all of those areas that is, one, research proven to make a difference, and two, reflected in genuine brain research around the way that people socialise, and indeed the way that young people learn to socialise. So what I love about the restorative ambition that the WA government has embarked upon is that it's an ambition built on research that we've seen, in particularly in more recent times, as for instance, data such as student suspension data has become such a pertinent measure for schools, that we've seen that schools that genuinely get the restorative ambition right are able to drive down student suspensions without just lowering the threshold for suspension. So I totally get it. You can reduce suspension numbers just by asking you to suspend less. Or we could create an environment in which less suspendable offences kind of happen. And that's what deep implementation of restorative practices can promise. It also promises improved mental health outcomes for all stakeholders. So for your staff, for your students, and also for your parent and carer community. Schools that get the restorative piece tend to record much better, significantly better mental health outcomes as a result of that implementation. Schools become a safe place. Schools become that kind of hub of the community that, in some ways, I don't want to do the whole longing for the past like I'm that old guy that says, if only it were just like it was in my day. But the truth is that we actually can reposition schools as places that improve people's mental health and connection. They're able to and I'm aware that some of the schools that are joining us today are actually catering for really significantly low socioeconomic communities. And there's some really fabulous evidence around when schools get this right, how they're able to disrupt even big community outcomes, such as disrupting the school to prison pipeline. You know, when young people emerge from restorative schools with a heightened sense of empathy and with an improved ability to be resilient despite the social circumstances that happen around them, they make better choices. And that keeps them out of prison, which is just really fabulous. And further, it connects to some of the pressure that schools are under around bullying. And I know I said the word, didn't I? Because I get that you deal with both the reality and the perception around bullying. And what we know, and this is evidenced in probably my favourite piece of, I don't know if you're allowed to have a favourite piece of bullying research, but I do, that was done by the University of London about 10 years ago now, where they looked at schools who were already performing really well when it comes to bullying and social outcomes in their school, and said what's evident within them. And within their top 10 was about 6 or 7 elements that you would say that's within a restorative framework. And indeed, at number 1 was that schools that counter bullying effectively are those with a restorative culture and ethos. And what that goes to for me is both an opportunity that if you just make that decision, that our school is going to have a restorative culture and ethos. The Greek meaning behind the word ethos is everything you say and everything you do, which means that we're now speaking to deep implementation, not just doing a bit of restorative practices. I'll talk more to that in a moment when we have a chat about risks. But it means that your kind of mission, you know, for where you want young people to end up beyond your influence is enacted through your school. And that's a really lovely thing for schools to feel like they're doing, I think particularly at the moment. So I think the ambition for WA schools to be restorative is a really worthy one. But I am also very clear that it places you on a tightrope. So where it leaves principals of schools that are supposed to go restorative is in a really icky and murky spot. There are some risks specifically around compliance that as principals and assistant principals, you should be aware of. So WA was the first, as I mentioned, to say, no, we're doing it. So there isn't an option, as is the case in some of the behaviour and wellbeing frameworks and policies in other states, that they treat restorative practices sometimes like a tool. In WA schools, it is clearly a mandate. And the way that that mandate exists for you is is in policy statements that begin with the principal. So if I may for just a moment, in the policy that I'm speaking to, there were 7 different areas that we were able to identify that specifically speaks to the tightrope that you find yourself on. The tightrope between 2 clear bits of land. So current state, where you are now, where you know that there's a mandate for you to get across to another state that says that you will be a restorative school in nature, but you're aware that you've got limited resource, you've got limited understanding, you've got limited practical application nous in your school, and you've got limited resource in order to be able to move all the people in your school across to this new spot on the other side of the tightrope. But you are responsible for it. So the way that you've been made responsible is through statements such as the principal engages with the school community in a co-design process that includes ways of working and expectations of positive student behaviour, that includes student strengths, abilities and diversity. Speaks directly to restorative practices. Second statement, the principal leads the development and implementation and monitoring of a whole school approach to behaviour that incorporates restorative principles, systems and approaches. So not only are you responsible for getting a bit of restorative practices in your school, you're responsible for bringing it in such a way that it becomes your system and approach. Third statement, the principal builds staff capability through training and support to understand and enact their responsibility in building positive behaviour. Fourth statement, the principal applies procedural fairness to decision making, and this is a really important point. Ensuring responses to behaviour are fair and appropriate. There's that word fairness again. So where do we actually pull this sort of ethereal notion of fairness from in any explicit way? We pull it from a restorative framework, which speaks directly to the notion of incorporated fairness through 3 key principles: engagement, explanation, and expectation clarity. And it is only in circumstances where those are enacted as part of process, not outcome. So the aim around fairness from this statement will not be attached to the outcomes that are achieved, but to the processes that are deployed in the school. And what we know about people is that unless those 3 elements exist, they will not label a process as being fair. Fourth statement, the principal provides opportunity for student and family voice. So we're going to actually have to make this a school community imperative, and we're going to need a communications piece that flows backwards and forwards from the school and into the community, and indeed into the student body as well. Sixth statement, the principal provides staff with access to training and professional learning to engage in reflective practice to enhance the learning outcomes for students with complex behaviour support needs. So we need to now reflect on the way that we are conducting ourselves in any sort of consistent way, so that we are not viewing student behaviour as a function of the student, but as a function of the interaction between the student and the educator. Now that will require more than teachers judging themselves, which is what we tend to do when we reflect. We tend to get out to the car at the end of the day, I better reflect. How'd I go today? Well, I either sucked or I was amazing. And we drive away, and unfortunately nothing changes. Reflective practice requires, yes, the habit of reflecting when you get to the car, but it also requires a mirror. And what Restorative Practices does is provide, for instance, the restorative operating domains, so that teachers can reflect on whether they were working today doing work to their students, not doing much at all, doing everything for their students. And I would contend that at the moment, there's educators across Australia doing far too much heavy lifting or working with their young people. And some of the artifacts within a sound restorative model, such as circles, allow us to manifest that work more easily. And as a result, we can make some really simple positive adjustments, because the aim of reflection should never be judgment. It should be a minor adjustment, in the same way that we reflect when we get up in the morning and look at ourselves in the mirror. It's not about, looking at myself and saying, that's a great beard. or that's a terrible bid, because again, nothing changes when we do that, when we make a judgment. But when I can just, I'll make a tiny adjustment here. It might be a little bit obsessive, but what I am doing is enacting what reflection's for, and it's to just make a little adjustment here, and I reckon I've got it about right for today. So you find yourself on this tightrope where you have to go across. But I think that one of the things that you know is that you don't have the resource. As I mentioned, limited understanding about what restorative practices actually is in your staff, limited support from the department and externally available to you, and in a lot of ways, limited will. People who don't want to get onto that tightrope. And unless we're able to help people build their will and understand that the need that has emerged for schools to go restorative in WA is not of their doing, is not because they failed. It's because the community and the world has changed and has passed a threshold where old approaches are still fit for purpose. That unless we deal with that, then we're probably going to find people who won't put the first toe on there. And that puts you at risk. It puts you at what we would call a compliance risk. But I would suggest that it also puts the department at risk. So the risk that I think that it puts the WA Department of Education at is that they cause confusion by allowing schools to get stuck in the middle. We might get some people onto the tightrope. We might get some people all the way to the other end. We might get some people who just go, no way, am I trying this stuff, this airy-fairy nonsense, And unfortunately, when we get a critical mass of people who are just somewhere on the tightrope but in neither destination, we cause incredible confusion. We have all sorts of conversations in schools about where's the line, where are we restorative up to, and then when does it stop and we go back to our old practices. We get high variability in where that line is for various people in the school, which means we get incredible inconsistency of practice. And the risk that the WA Department of Education faces is en masse, a whole group of schools going, we tried. And this restorative stuff, it doesn't work. We can't get everyone on board. We can't get everyone to practice this way. And as a result, eventually there's a risk for the WA Department of Education that we did an enormous amount of work and we failed. We weren't able to get enough schools to the other side with positive stories that others could take as case studies and replicate in their schools. And again, we will have fallen for the same trap of cycling around asking our schools to do a lot of work, investing a huge amount of resource and getting very little return for it. That's a risk I don't want WA schools to take. And so I think that the way to get it done is not necessarily by me attacking the WA Department of Education. It's not what I'm doing, because even the WA behaviour advisors that I've spoken to and that we've had interactions at real schools with over the years have kind of conceded that they don't have the resource to get all the people from one side of the tightrope to the other. It's to say we understand. It's to say that the best way to get this done is for individual schools, individual principals to be aware of these policy statements, never get the highlighted bit in the middle, and to choose for themselves that this is work that they are going to, that they're going to embark upon for the benefit of their people. And the benefits are significant. I contend that I don't even need to contend. We have a teacher workforce crisis in Australia, and WA is not immune from it. We're losing too many teachers, and probably the word that I need to insert in that sentence is many. We're losing too many good teachers, because they're not getting the benefits of what Restorative Practices has provided me across, like I said, it's probably about 25 years now. My two benefits of working restoratively are that it allows me to be more effective. I am very clear, and I can unequivocally point both eyes down the camera at you now and tell you that when I work restoratively as a teacher, forget my school leadership for the moment, but when I speak, when I practice restoratively, young people make more progress in my company, both academically and socially. Learning happens deeper and faster when I'm practicing restoratively, and I like that. I like feeling effective. And I think that there are too many teachers going home at the moment at the end of the day feeling that they sort of didn't get anywhere. We didn't make progress. We're not getting the thrill of achievement in our work at the moment. We're not getting the thrill of fulfillment in our work at the moment. And it's contributing to people being driven out of the profession. And then the second benefit I think that exists for us in working restoratively as educators is I smile because I'm less stressed when I work restoratively. And that's chiefly because there's a narrow gap between my practice and my purpose. What I would contend is that a lot of those failed attempts to have teachers practice differently to get a different response because they were built on a hypothetical, not on a decent rigorous research, is that we've actually driven people further away from enacting their purpose in their work. And I think that when you go home at the end of the day feeling that what I did today is not the reason I got into teaching, it kind of steals our soul. And what I love, and I don't use that word lightly, but I do use it honestly, what I love about practicing restoratively is that there is a narrow gap between what I did on a particular day and what I believe about working with young people. And that doesn't mean it works all the time. So the promise around practicing restoratively is not about outcomes. It's just about good process and practice. And what I know is that regardless of the outcomes that I get as an educator, I can lean back into the good practice and enjoy knowing that I was doing the best that I possibly could with what I had at the time. And I'd also contend that there's an enormous school opportunity for you here. So I wanted to, I guess, just give you a little bit of data about what's possible. So when we look at an en masse kind of situation at a decent sample size, what we did last year at Real Schools was we asked all of our Victorian partner schools, and we've got a lot of them. So we're talking about, about 40 or 50 schools here who put who provided us with what Victorian schools call their panorama reports. And these are government schools. And we were able to synthesize these panorama reports to be able to look at the schools that had done a 3-year partnership with us and to look at what was the average gain in a number of different areas. Now, we wanted to make sure that that gain was demonstrable against all 3 key stakeholder groups. So we looked first of all, and they're kind of the light orange factors here around students. And what we're able to demonstrate is that in terms of their perception of effective classroom behaviour and management of that in the school, that there was a significant jump. Further, a significant jump in what they would call effective teaching time, and further again in terms of their sense of connectedness to the school. And these are 3 areas that I think that schools are striving incredibly hard for at the moment and deserve some return on. We then looked at teachers. And we asked, in terms of the teachers, how did they feel about how did they feel and perceive the school climate to be? And there was a significant jump, and also a significant jump in trust for their colleagues. Now, trust is again one of those great ethereal terms that gets bandied around with a number of different definitions. Trust, the research on trust is really clear. And what builds a high trust environment? It is the habitualisation of thanking and congratulating each other even in a single relationship, let alone across a staff, for doing things that we value. What does restorative practices allow for your school? It allows you to get really clear on what are the practices as teachers that we value. And it enacts the notion of us doing it together in such a way that we thank and congratulate each other when we have a go, based on the process, not the outcome. And as a result, we get increases in trust when people say, just love the way you did that circle, love the way you handled that interaction in the yard, love the way you spoke to that child. Because we're going to talk about language, conduct, and mindset as being our 3 key drivers. And they're all incredibly practical ways to be able to move forward. We then looked at parents. We gulped. Did they notice? And we were delighted to see that there'd been a significant jump in our partner schools in terms of general satisfaction from parents when we were able to synthesize the different ways in which that they were surveyed to be able to let us know what their perception was of the school. In more specific terms, we were able to demonstrably measure against all of these schools that there was an average decrease in total student suspension days each year of 8.7. So 8.7 less suspension days in our partner schools across a 3-year period of implementing restorative practices. There was also a decrease of 3.1 days in terms of absenteeism across these schools. So we talk a lot about attendance strategy. We actually have come to a reasonably clear conclusion here, is that the best attendance strategy is to create a culture where people want to attend school. Kind of makes sense when you say it like that, doesn't it? And what we're able also to point out that there were a 10.5% increase in average growth against 6 domains that the state mandates as being the key educative domains that measure improvement in our schools. And across all 6, we were able to average a 10.5% improvement in schools. What does this tell us? get the culture piece right and the learning goes up. I get that the language isn't quite perfect there. Maybe I need to be a part of one of the English classes that's improved here. But this is, again, a key driver of improving student learning outcomes is not necessarily another program around literacy and numeracy, but creating a culture where young people are activated in pursuit of their own achievement and their own progress. It's really exciting to see these things happen. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the model for deploying this is a reasonably simple one. And it rejects a notion, I'm just stretching the leg a little bit there, it rejects the notion that what we need to do is to become a bit of a restorative school. The most common trap that schools fall for when they do a bit of restorative practices is they buy themselves some question cards, and we've got them. You know, they're available to our partner schools that outline the restorative script that was developed by a wonderful Australian called Terry O'Connell. I've had the privilege of speaking to many times about practicing restoratively, but Terry's a copper. He's the copper from Wagga in New South Wales, who has chiefly used this restorative principle and overlaid it across the challenge of juvenile diversion and crime in Australia, and found alternative ways for young people who've done serious things to not be pointed at prison. And Terry says, so there has to be implications to it. I said, there are. I said, but it's not to get a question card out every time the kid does the wrong thing and have a 1 hour circle, because you don't have time. There's a disrespect paid to the volume of interactions that happen in a school when we say to teachers, just take this question card, get my hand right, and deploy this, and then you'll be a restorative school. And it's not true either. Your school is not restorative because it responds to wrongdoing with a question card. What we help schools do is, first of all, change their language. And we help them in 4 ways. So anybody who's got a working experience with restorative practices might be aware of, for instance, effective language. That's not the, and that's fabulous because it's a really powerful way to enact both the neocortex and the limbic system of the brain. When you enact multiple componentry within the brain, you get deeper learning. With deeper learning, young people can predict and lead to self-regulation. All amazing. And you can do that just simply by inserting a feelings word, an affective word, within what you're already saying, such as, you know, instead of don't do that, we might say, I'm disappointed to see you do that, do something else. It doesn't cost us any time, but it's a shift in language that allows young people to get the information they need to self-regulate. But there's more. So in terms of language, not only do we teach staffs to do that, but we teach, for instance, what's called stored responses. So stored responses are effectively when we get a little bit limbic system, emotional, and ours is an emotional caper. You know, when we get a little emotional, what is it that we're going to say so that we're not drawn off track and become inconsistent in the way that we practice? I was meeting with one of our partner schools a while back now in a pretty disadvantaged community in regional community in New South Wales, and there was a graduate teacher there called Jordan. And Jordan, my job on the day was, it was one of our in-class support days, and my job was to go along and watch Jordan teach for half an hour, and then to have a cuppa with him for 15 minutes and provide him with some feedback, and we'd be released for that. And I walked to the classroom. I said, Jordan, what are we looking at today? And he said, it's the calling out. It's driving me bonkers. And I went, all right. You know, and I watched and I listened, and Jordan was right. There was a lot of calling out in his year 8 class. And at the end of it, I took my little notebook and I sat down for that coffee with Jordan. And he said, you see? And I said, I do, mate. There's a lot happening in there. And he said, and I said, what do you think is the primary motivator of the students calling out? And he went, oh, he said, is it attention? Is it to get attention? I said, it probably is. And that sort of is something that probably resonates with you too. It's probably the case. And Jordan, and I said, how many times do you think you paid attention to students who yelled out? And he went, oh, I do it a bit, don't I? He said, maybe 8 or 10. And I said, nah. And he said, 12. And I said, 32. And he was going better than 1 a minute. Sometimes positive attention. Student calls, hey, mister, I need a pen. You just chuck a pen, you know. And sometimes negative attention. Hey, mister, I need a pen. Don't call out. But either way, they were getting their currency, the currency of voice and eyeballs from Jordan. And he said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, how about you just do this? And this is my stored response for calling out, because it drives me a bit bonkers too. I said, how about when your student calls out on your right, and over here I'm looking to my right, I hope that's working on your screen. You just give them that hand and half a second of eye contact, just to let them know you see it, but that's all. So unfortunately, I can't listen when people call out, but I can listen to you. It's because of the way you're sitting now. Is there anything you want me to clarify? I often point out this kid over here is freaking out. But it's not for that kid, it's for the kid over this side. It's to let them know that there are ways to get my attention, that's it. And Jordan said, okay, a bit nervously. I said, what? He goes, but what do I do the second time? And I said, nothing. You just, that's all you do from now on. It's that every single time. And I could tell Jordan was skeptical. And so he walked away from our conversation, went off to teach for the rest of the day. I went off and observed and co-taught and modelled with a number of different teachers. And then at the end of the day, we had a big staff debrief in the library. Jordan walked into the room. I saw him walk in. I saw him scan the room and spot me and walk straight at me. He had this fierce look on his face. I thought, oh, I think I broke him. And Jordan walked up to me and hugged me. And which is weird because I'm 6'4", Jordan's 5'8". He's got like his head on his chair, on my chest. And I looked down and said, what's going on, mate? And he said, he looked up at me and goes, 9B are putting their hands up. 9B are putting their hands up. And I said, that's incredible. I said, get your head off me. I said, tell me what went on. He goes, it was, I didn't realize the sort of the power of this language bit and everything like that. I said, okay, can I ask, did it get rid of calling out in your classes? And he goes, no. So did it improve it at all? And he went, oh, by about probably 70 or 80%. Now, an outcomes obsessed school is going to go, yeah, but what about the other 20 or 30%? A process curious school, a process obsessed school, which is what a restorative school is, says, how cool, we just be happy that with a strategy that cost us only a couple of seconds, we're able to improve the one behaviour that is driving Jordan completely bonkers by 70 to 80%. Can we just be happy and move on to the next opportunity to get him another 70 to 80% gain? And it comes through a shift, not in having taught the kids respect in a mini lesson on a Wednesday arvo, but by us as teachers just changing our language a little bit. So we speak to effective language, we speak to stored responses, we speak to positive priming and stakeholder protection. There's 4 levers we can pull that cost teachers nothing in terms of time, but allow them to have a significant impact in terms of return. From a conduct perspective, we speak to 2 key areas. We help your teachers to be able to respond to conflict and wrongdoing consistently by adopting not a past-based method, which is what the kind of the old 200 years old crime and punishment method is. It's a past-based method for being able to work restoratively, and it allows, facilitates our teachers, frankly, conducting 1-hour episodes of education CSI every time something goes wrong, and leading themselves into having to make a judgment that's going to, frankly, piss off quite a few people amongst that group because they don't know. They don't know who's telling the truth. So we reject that model and say that what we want to do is to go past, present, future as quickly as possible. We deploy for group situations a methodology called P3, P3, F3, which means we spend with our students when there's group conflict, 3 minutes talking about the past, 3 minutes talking about the present, and 3 minutes talking about the future, i.e., what are you going to do to try and fix this up? And it positions us as educators, not as arbiters, judge, jury, and executioner, but as facilitators of thanking and congratulating young people for taking that personal responsibility. It also saves me at least about 51 minutes because that's about a 1-hour episode of Education CSI is reduced down to that point, and I like that idea. And the other conduct piece is going to be around the way that we do these restorative principles reach our instructional model. Reactive would be a question card for when kids screw up. Proactive would be letting some of these principles reach the classroom before we even do our teaching. And we've had teachers who significantly impacted the classroom architecture that they're deploying to facilitate the use of circles for checking in, for checking out, for preparing, for responding, and also for learning, in order to be able to create more highly engaging learning environments for their students. Because let's be honest, kids are easier to teach when they're engaged. Kids behave better when they're engaged, and there's less room, less oxygen for disengaged and poor behaviour choices when you're engaged. And so we let some of these principles around, like I said, around brain research and the way we learn to engage and the way we learn to learn and make progress. We allow them to reach our instructional model, and it's so exciting when we see that happen. And the third piece here that we speak to is around mindset, because there are some mindsets, some things that we've set our minds to in our schools that are letting us down, that are not true. And so we say things like, for instance, whenever I get in the conversation with educators about punishment and consequences and where they fit, they'll often will do the restorative, but shouldn't there still be a punishment? And we'll ask them, I'll often ask people in that situation, what makes you say that? And they say, well, because that's the way the real world works, that if you do the wrong thing, there's a consequence for it. I'm often asking people, when was the last time you got a fine for changing lanes without indicating? It almost never happens. But most of us are still driving safely. What's that all about? The real world is not a simple crime and punishment equation. In fact, most of us are hacking that system every single day. The evidence being that about 90 to 94% of the things that you do, and we all do, that are either immoral, a bit naughty or illegal, we get away with. So why is it that we've still got a webinar full of dedicated professional people mostly living out their moral code? It's because you have one. And what does Restorative Practices do? It allows you to implement, install in young people the beginnings of a moral code that they can live by themselves without us needing to be present to catch them getting it wrong. Are there punishments and consequences within a restorative model? Yes. And so what we do is we set our mind to how we can do that consistently. Our partner schools access a really simple one-pager that makes 3 circumstances in which punishments and consequences are applied really clear. Really clear. And I'm really happy to send that through to you after today as well. It's part of, I didn't realise I didn't have one, part of a book that I wrote on this. And so for anybody who's interested, we're not a book selling organisation. So if you do head to realschools.com.au and look under books, you'll see a book called Restoring Teaching that unpacks this framework. And essentially the job of becoming restorative is supporting your people, your staff, to know that framework and to get really good at it together. It's kind of all it is, but that book's free. So if you want to access it, we'll send you the link after the webinar today as well. But you can either order for yourself or for your leadership team, or even for your whole school, and all you'll be hit for is the postage and handling. So take advantage of that one would be my advice. So there's a model and there's a method. So this I think highlights that the ambition that the WA Education Department has is unfortunately short of the support required for your school to be able to reach the other side of the tightrope. We've developed a model that reflects the work that needs to be done to get everybody to the other side. And what we think the recipe is 10 elements. Number one is you need high quality professional learning, but having that as a standalone is a risk. So my encouragement to you would be, don't go book restorative practices training for your school and think it'll change anything. 3 to 4 weeks later, it's going to be likely that everybody had a great PL day, but nothing's changed, because it'll need to be backed up by the 9 other elements, which all have a really strong bias for implementation. I mentioned before the day that I spent with Jordan, the lesson that I spent with Jordan, that's part of an in-class support day, which means that our teachers need to be able to want to make these changes a Vygotsky-driven approach to practice shift, which means they'll need first some people to come along and model this work for them. They'll need to then co-teach it with them, and then they'll need to provide feedback on it once they're having a go at it independently. You'll need to engage your parent community through either a broadcasting plan, or you will need, and that goes to number 7, which is the communications plan outward, or explicit events that allow them to come in and understand the framework that you're using. We don't need our parents to make the trip right across the tightrope with us. I mean, that feels a bit too hard. They all went to school and they've decided already what school should be. So there's a little bit of assumed expertise around that. I just need them to shift their reference point a little bit for what they expect of the school, and that's achievable if we plan for it. You'll need your leadership team, your executive team mentored, and you'll need them building 2 key documents. One, a back of house action plan that ensures that we don't have the 3 to 4 week lag, and you'll also need a public declaration. Now, I've highlighted that in orange because after today, I'm going to send you a sample of that SEP. We call it a student engagement plan. I'm pretty clear that there's a conversation going on in every Australian school that says we should get everyone on the same page about practice. I think then it's incumbent upon us to write that page. And so we do. And so I think it's really important that we make really clear at the way that we're going to treat each other at the school. And we allay a lot of community anxiety by being able to say to people, here's the plan. This is how we treat each other at the school. You know, what do you want to know? Can I explain it further to you? It's up on the wall. It's in your enrolment pack. It's on our socials. You know, this is how we treat each other. And this is what we're working towards getting good at. This is what we're holding each other account for. You'll also need you'll also need point 8, the teacher coaching. So you'll have teachers at either end of the career continuum. Sometimes your early career teachers who are often characterised by being high on enthusiasm but low on capacity. They'll need a lot of how support. They just want to know, how do I do this stuff? So that they don't get stuck on the wrong side of an implementation barrier. Which will also have teachers at the other end of the career continuum who are sometimes characterised by being high on capacity but low on enthusiasm. The conversations with them will need to be more about why they should bother, and why they should feel brave enough to walk away from a model that they've been deploying for a really long time to work differently. You'll need to resource them. I'm going to send you through a couple of samples. This goes to this notion of avoiding the 3 to 4 week implementation lag. I'm going to send you through an article that we use that our partner schools use to support their staff meetings or PLC or faculty meetings to be able to keep revisiting this work. All the articles that we produce are linked to the AITSL standards. I'm going to send you a short video as well, which is what we call a staff meeting conversation starter that we use to have me, it's pretty much me sitting here, talking about 3 to 5 minutes of this and providing a provocation that they can talk about. So that we don't have additional meetings in your school where we focus on practice, but we steal 5 minutes of every one to make sure that we slowly and incrementally get the improvements that we're looking for. And we're also going to, the other thing you'll need is for people to feel the thrill of progress, and you'll need to measure as a result of that. And we provide our partner schools with tools around for leaders that are quite diagnostic in nature. We provide tools for students so that they can report to us on how they're feeling about self. They're called social outcome surveys, and how they're feeling about school, which is our school climate surveys, and also for staff, for teachers. So we have a confidence and competence tool. So we self-assess against AITSL standards that have been reframed in terms of working restoratively, so that they can let us know where their individual needs for coaching are and where our whole school foci needs to be. And it works. Gave you a couple of case studies at the start of today. And I also wanted to point out to you that en masse this works. And this again lets me know that the WA Department of Education ambition is a worthy one. So this is a document that's been produced by 5 schools in Western Sydney, who we've been working with for about 18 months now. So they were doing the individual work of implementing, but they're doing a collective piece where they say, we actually don't want our communities shopping against each other, or even shopping into other sectors. We actually want them to know that there's no need for that, because we've made commitment together around why we are restorative schools, made commitment around how we speak to each other, how we conduct ourselves around each other, how we deal with conflict and wrongdoing, and how we do our teaching. And we make commitment around the mindsets that drive the way we work. And this is a combined document that the schools have put out to the community that is, again, allaying a lot of community anxiety about the way that their kids are going to be treated at the school, about the way that they're going to be treated at the school. But these schools have also reported significant improvements in terms of student conduct. And these aren't schools where kids have all the pre-existing advantages, not at all. They've also reported reduced student suspensions. They've also reported increases in teacher confidence and competence. And they're starting to get those benefits that I mentioned earlier of people who feel more effective in their work and who are less stressed. And they like that too. So we're going to send you through that document as well. So one of the things that you might consider is that if you're going to do this work, is doing it in the company of some other local schools and getting together, because collectively this can make a really significant and strong community response, community contribution that is certainly the antithesis of us working against each other. couple of other things you can do. So one of the things I think Chris might even, who's our wonderful exec assistant who's in the background on this webinar and make sure that I'm completely organised, she might put in the chat a link that allows you to register. I'm coming to Perth, and I get that WA is a big place, and you're not all from Perth, and if you're not in Perth, you're probably a long way from Perth. But Perth's the best I can do. So right at the moment, I'm coming to Perth in August. I'm going to run 2 workshops. The first one is called Restorative Classrooms, Strong Classrooms, very much geared at practitioners, so at teachers. And it's a full day opportunity to kind of immerse yourself in, I often call it the cordial version of this, just I give you the crash course in how to practice restoratively and try and get some people in your school started in that regard. And we think that's important. So that's available to you. The second day on the 10th of August, what I'm going to do is to run a 4-hour seminar / workshop called The Art of School Culture Leadership. A little less specific around restorative practices, a different audience target in that I really want to speak to you. I want to speak to principals and school leaders about the task of leading a really sound, restorative, strong school, and how you can get that going from entirely a leadership, not a practice perspective. So we're kind of giving both ends of the spectrum on this trip. Okay, the practical, but then also the leadership piece on the second day. You'll leave with a plan for your school, and I really want to encourage you to come along for that. For people watching this beyond the live version today, keep an eye out in the email that you accessed this recording, and there'll be some links for you to be able to come along and register for those events as well. And the other thing that you might like to do is have a little think about your school, because there's a cost of not doing this for your school. Okay. The cost, I think, is, as I've sort of made clear in some of the presentation today, a compliance one. The principal appears way too many times in the behaviour and wellbeing framework that's been released for you to be able to ignore that. The imperative has been provided by the department. The work is incumbent upon the principal, and there's a safety piece around this tightrope that you're going to walk that you ignore if you choose to not do this work moving forward. But there's also a mission risk. I'm going to guess that the reason you got into assistant principalship and principalship was not because you like the idea of working an extra 30 or 40 hours a week. I'm going to guess it's because you have a deep moral purpose for pointing young people on a more positive life trajectory. I'm going to guess that it's because you're motivated by the notion of building an environment where educators can come to work every day and feel like they're focused on doing their best possible work. And so I really want to make sure that you understand that it's not just about complying with policy, the decision to work restoratively. It's about your stakeholders getting the best they can from your school. And that's a responsibility that I don't want you to walk away from. Because without it, I don't think you'll be fulfilled as an educator. That's how important I think this is. I actually think that it's an incredibly important decision for you as a school leader, but I also think that this presents as an enormous opportunity for the WA Education Department. I think that this really could be the decision to be the first state to jump and say, we are going to do this restorative thing for our schools and with our schools. I think it could be the thing that changes education, not only in Australia, but across Western countries, to prove that focusing on culture is the primary driver of improvement in our schools, I think is an incredibly exciting adventure and opportunity. And I don't want you missing out on that. And so to that effect, if the notion of working with us on that and getting the resource that you need to get from one side of the tightrope to the other sounds like a good idea, then there's a couple of things you can do. Number one is that you can just put the word meet in the chat box and we'll follow up directly and get a conversation to happen straight away. If you're watching the recording or you do it later on, you'll see in the email that we'll send you a way for you to click on a link, drop an email and make sure that that conversation happens. We have a reduced number because of the amount of schools who are coming on at the moment working with us. There's a cap on the number of schools that we can work with in WA moving forward. We'd love your school to be one of them. So there's a little bit of haste around getting in before we unfortunately don't have the staff to be able to make the commitment that we need to get you across that tightrope. So if you want to have a chat about it for your school, then please get in touch and let us know. Just looking, and I've booked into the Art of School Culture Leadership. Is there any pre-reading you'd suggest prior to that session? No, there's not. Actually, a suggestion would be, Kirsty, this one. That way you'll understand what has happened the previous day in terms of what the framework is that we're suggesting that you lead. And then what we're going to do is to sort of take the behaviour and practice element above the how piece and talk about how you can lead others and mobilise others in pursuit of wanting to do that work. That's where we'll be putting the focus on the second day. All right, and you know what, I'm on an hour, so I'm going to end up. Thank you. I really appreciate the investment of your time. I hope you feel that it's something that's worthy of your time. I'm going to have a slow finish, which means that if you've got a comment or a question that you want to make, I'll just scan through the chat box now and see if there are any that come along that you want me to respond to. But short of that, I'll let you get on with your day, and thank you for the incredible work that you're doing in our schools every single day to try and make this work. All right, bye for now. I'll let you go. Like I said, slow finish, so I'll just sit here. You get to leave when you want. All right.